This recording is being prepared by Boston Air Route Traffic Control Center. The subject concerns a Freedom of Information Act request involving UFO sightings on November 18, 1995 at approximately 0323 Coordinated Universal Time. The agency involved in this UFO sightings is Boston Air Route Traffic Control Center. I hereby certify that the following is a true recording of the original recorded transmission pertaining to the subject UFO sightings.
Boston Center 405 heavy. 405 guys. We just passed traffic the left wing, about 2,000 feet above us. What traffic was it? This Lufthansa 405? That's Lufthansa 405. We had opposite traffic on the left wing. Can you confirm that? Lufthansa 405, negative. I show no traffic in your area within 20 or 30 miles. It should be on our tail about 10 miles. We passed it just 1 minute ago and it was looking straight. Steamer 226 confirms that. Yeah, it's just above us on our left-hand side about 3 minutes ago. And what altitude does it appear to be at Lufthansa 405? It was only 2,000 or 3,000 feet above us. We are now passing Saturday 260, about perhaps 27 or 290. Lufthansa 405, roger. Steamer 226, we confirmed that. We had something go past us about 1 to 2,000 feet above on the left-hand side. It looked like a green trail on it with a very bright light at the front of it. We assumed it was an opposite traffic. Steamer 226, roger that. The speedboat is now ahead of us or behind us, so where is it? And Lufthansa 405, the speedbird is in your 12 o'clock in about 30 miles, 40 miles. And the heading of the traffic, was it the same direction or opposite direction? Exactly opposite, Lufthansa 405 heavy. Roger, did it pass off your right side? Left side. Roger. Yeah, and the Steamer 226 confirms that. It seems we saw the same thing. It certainly looked like an aircraft initially, but it may not have been. We can confirm this. It was looking really strange with a long light in the tail. Yeah, big bright light on the front and a greenish tail coming out the back. Okay, Lufthansa 405, Speedbird 226, thanks. We'll look into it. And Speedbird 226, did it go overhead, the traffic go overhead you, or was it below you? It was overhead and off to the left, much the same as the lift here. I actually looked about opposite traffic 2,000 feet above, that's what it initially looked like, but then it did have a very strong trail to vapor trail, which looked more like smoke, and the light on the front was very, very bright. And as it went past us, it seemed to disappear once it was about 5 miles behind us. Speedbird 226, roger. Were you level at 29 at that time? Yeah, affirmative. Roger. And Lufthansa 405, how far off to your side did that pass, the traffic pass? It was pretty close, and like the speedbird said, it looked like 2,000 or 3,000 feet above on the left wing, just 1 mile, and on opposite track, and it didn't have any lights, silver light, beacon light, or red or green light, only a white light in front, and with a long green light, looked like a UFO. Lufthansa 405, roger that. Like I said, we had nothing flying in the area. You are just north of a military operating area, but the traffic shouldn't have varied out that far out of the area. Giant Killer tape on the 59. Thank you. Hey, you got anything flying out in the area? Negative 105 turned over, 0300. Well, then I just had a couple of UFO reports. Oh, is that right? I had a couple of guys that reported lights just going over their head. I had no traffic whatsoever in the area. They said it passed within a mile of them, like 2,000 feet above them, opposite direction. Huh. Well, it could have been a meteor or something. Who reported that? Speedbird or Lufthansa. Well, we don't have an aircraft out there. Okay. Hello? That DHL 172, did you work him?
Yeah.
Okay, you still working him?
No.
Did he report anything strange to you?
No.
No? Okay.
There was a bunch of guys that reported a meteorite.
Oh, it was a meteor?
Yeah, that's what it was. I haven't heard any reports myself. I haven't done down here, so.
Yeah, a meteor though. These guys said it passed like 2,000 feet above, just off their left side by a mile.
Really?
Yeah. They said it looked like an aircraft with a light in the front and a green trail in the back.
Wow. Man, that's neat.
Sorry, Fred. Sorry.
Just ask them to give us an idea if they have any idea of how fast the object was going.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. I'll just listen.
And Lufthansa 405, can you give an estimate on the speed of your observation? Lufthansa 405 Heavy, the aircraft looked very fast. We are also curious about it, and is it possible that there might be a military jet flying there?
Lufthansa 405, we're not sure, but could it have been a meteor, or did it definitely look like an aircraft?
We can't tell you about that, but we had no left light and no strobe lights, that's for sure,
Lufthansa 405, so you would say that it definitely wasn't a meteorite?
So low, I don't know, Lufthansa 405.
Lufthansa 405, roger. Thank you.
Just do a 226 now, it couldn't have been a meteorite because it was flying level.
Roger, it was flying level. Okay, we're looking into it. I mean, we're making a report. We really don't know what it was.
To be perfectly honest, Lufthansa is quite right. It looked as if it was going very quickly. It definitely looked faster than normal aircraft. It didn't look like a meteorite simply because it seemed to be in level flight. That was the thing. It was cruising in a straight line and at one level flight off the left wingtip with what looked like more than a normal vapor trail behind it. It was much heavier than a normal vapor trail.
Number 226, thank you.
They said it was a level flight.
135.2, Lufthansa 405 Heavy. So did you find out anything about it?
Lufthansa 405, negative. There was reports in other sectors of the same thing, and they said it might have been meteor showers, but according to what you guys reported, something else, and we're basically just filing a report. That's all we can do.
Okay, thanks a lot, Lufthansa 405 Heavy. Have a good night.
And the military doesn't admit to anything flying tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Good night.
Boston, good evening. Airline 009, flight level 330.
Airline 009, Boston. Center, good evening.
Subject concerns: a UFO sighting involving November 7 Juliet Sierra on April 13, 1996 at approximately 0351 Coordinated Universal Time. The agency involved in this UFO sighting is New York Air Traffic Control Center. I hereby certify that the following is a true recording of the original recorded transmissions pertaining to this subject UFO sighting.
Center 7 Sierra Juliet, do you have traffic for us at 2 o'clock?
7 Sierra Juliet, 1 o'clock and 10 miles eastbound descending at a 29, but that's about all that's out there.
Okay. Here's Center 7 Sierra Juliet.
7 Sierra Juliet, go.
We got traffic here about 1:30 to 2 o'clock. It's very bright, doesn't seem to be moving, just a change of colors. I don't think it's a star. It looks like it's about 8 or 10 miles away.
Actually, I'm showing a target 1230, 10 miles, appears to be southbound, type altitude unknown.
We're up here at 38, so I doubt that's him. This thing looks the same altitude as us.
Roger that. Connie 705, traffic 2 o'clock, 15 miles southbound, type and altitude unknown. Let me see what you see up there. Should be up around 39,000.
Yeah, I see someone on the fish finder.
1909, descending out 30.6 to 9,000.
5 Sierra Juliet, you still see traffic out there?
Hell yeah.
You got a direction on him?
He's stationary. He's about 8 to 10 miles, and he looks like he's coming right at us. He gets real bright, like he's got his landing lights on, then turns away. Probably the comet. No, we saw the comet about 2 weeks ago. We know what that looks like. It isn't even close.
Okay, Cactus 700. Take a look at 2 o'clock, 25 miles, about 2,000 feet above you. So let me know if you see any big traffic out there.
That's that same planet that's been there for about 3 or 4 weeks.
And November 7 Sierra Juliet, you're level at 39 now, is that correct?
That's affirmative.
Roger.
1146.
Roger, 7 Sierra Juliet, you go up your left wing now.
Going off our left wing now.
Roger that. 7, contact New York approach 120.15.
Okay, my Cactus 700's got 10 going to 9 o'clock traffic. So it could be about the same altitude, opposite direction.
7 Sierra Juliet, roger, and how close is it getting to you?
That wasn't 7 Sierra Juliet. That was someone else calling me, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. Last call, say it again with the call sign.
That was Cactus 700. That traffic you asked us if we saw, we see him moving off to the left now.
Cactus 700, I concur. I got a target out there, primary only.
Bill 94 on Cactus radar with Imperial. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Now he's moving away from you.
He's at our 9 o'clock. He's south of us.
Cactus 700, roger. I do show traffic over your left, about 20 miles eastbound, 37,000. That's one of ours. November 7 Sierra Juliet, it's been fun. Contact Cleveland Center 119.72.
Okay, 2972, and that traffic just disappeared.
7 Sierra Juliet, frequency is 119.72.
1972, good night.
This is the end of the re-recording concerning the UFO sighting involving November 7 Juliet Sierra.
This event took place October 21st, 1978, out of Melbourne, Australia. It achieved worldwide attention here in America as well. A young pilot named Frederick Valentich was flying by himself in a rented Cessna 182 long-range model. He took off in the evening en route over Bass Strait, which is out over the ocean south of Australia, to go to King Island. He's going to land, refuel, buy some crayfish, which are a delicacy, and then come back with the crayfish that night. Why is he doing this? In order to earn more flight hours for a commercial license, and also instrument rating and so forth. Well, what happens is he gets approximately 6 minutes out over Bass Strait, which is now pitch dark, and he sees a very strange lighted object ahead of him that hovers above him, that disappears instantaneously, and then reappears in a new location, which is a long shape. He said, "Melbourne, I've got a long shape. It's got a green light. Would you know what kind of aircraft I've got?" Well, this radio tape, which lasts 14 minutes, really constitutes all the evidence there is on this case. And I've done an analysis of that voice tape and reconstructed the event, and Frederick Valentich disappeared at the end of this event this evening and has never been found. It's a very fascinating case because of all of the challenges to understanding what might have happened at a distance, in this case in Australia, from here in America. The search and rescue operation went into effect the next morning. He did not arrive on time, and so automatically the authorities set up an SAR, it's called, Search and Rescue Operation. The Royal Australian Air Force got into gear and flew P-3 search planes. His friends at the air club mounted an effort and took off and flew crisscross patterns and so forth the next day, several days actually. They could find nothing. No wreckage has ever been found. The long-range model Cessna had flotation tanks in the wings in various parts of the fuselage. So something should show up sooner or later on a beach. And the parts of the aircraft fuselage have serial numbers stamped into them. And so sooner or later, something should show up, but nothing ever did. The Maritime Commission, or the organization, I should say, in Melbourne, issued a notice to ships at sea to be looking for wreckage at all, and oil slicks on the water. Nothing was ever found. The continental shelf at this point, I don't remember the exact depth, but it's fairly shallow. And of course it is mapped very precisely for naval reasons. I don't believe any detailed underwater search was done. I don't believe so. The case is very interesting from the standpoint that here's a young man who had a wonderful career ahead. He was bright, hard-working, honest as far as we can tell. He had everything to lose by making up a story like this.
I'm Neil Daniels, and retired airline captain. I've been flying airplanes since 1936, and I've flown everything from single-place sailplanes up to captain on 747s. My logbook shows well over 30,000 hours of flying time. And up until just recently, I've been flying my Cessna 182. During the World War II, I got into cadet school and ended up in B-17s and served over in the 8th Air Force, and I did a tour of missions over there. Fortunately, I completed it without too much problem, and I came back after the war was over and went to work for the airlines. And this incident happened when I was flying as captain on a DC-10. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening. We were about halfway between Buffalo, New York, and Albany on they call it J-94 Airways. The airplane was flying on the autopilot, on the first officer's autopilot. It was his turn to fly. And I was doing the radio commentary and talking to air traffic control, and all of a sudden the airplane started a left turn, a bank about 20 degrees off course. And air traffic control in Boston asked us what our intentions were. I said, well, as soon as we figure out what it is, we'll let you know. And so we all looked to the left at that time, and there was this very bright, very brilliant light object off to the left of the aircraft. It's hard to determine not just how far away it was or anything at night, but it did disrupt all three compasses on the aircraft, and this is what the concern was. Normally that doesn't happen. So the first officer looked at this object, and the flight engineer got out of his seat and looked out the window behind me and saw it. And we turned the autopilot off and proceeded to go back on course towards Albany. I asked air traffic control if they had any objects showing on their radar off the left wing, and their answer was negative. They didn't have any. So thinking it all over, we decided not to say anything about it until later on because of the time delay and everything. We had a quick turnaround, and we were going to go back the next day. So it was some time before I got to talk to you about this and write the report.
Could you describe something about the compasses?
Well, the thing that what got my attention was the fact that all three compasses were showing different readings on it. And so there was a magnetic force involved in this incident that affected the autopilot and made the aircraft turn off course. The aircraft flying on the first officer's autopilot on heading mode, when this influence, whatever it was, hit it and the airplane turned into a 20-degree bank, the autopilot should have disengaged, but it didn't until he pushed the button and disengaged the autopilot himself, and then returned back on course again. After we got back going again and got headed toward Albany and back on autopilot where everything functioned normally, I watched the aircraft, or whatever this object was, disappear back towards the 8 o'clock position. And then all of a sudden it picked up speed, and zip, it was gone, just like that. And that was the brief incident, but there was something there that I didn't really understand.
I'd like to comment briefly on Captain Daniels' sighting, because I think that there's something really quite important there in terms of the electromagnetic energy that was present. And it has to do with the deviation of the two gyro compasses. Now, it's one thing for a magnetic compass to swing or to deviate and hold a new position because of a new magnetic field. It's quite another thing for a gyro compass to do this, or to continue rotating. And it suggests that there is an inertial field, not a magnetic field effect here, a change in the inertial field at the airplane. Well, now, from a physics point of view, this cannot be explained. We don't know how to do that. But we may be on the verge or on the edge of an understanding here of new physics, a new understanding of how energy may be manipulated. Maybe not created, I'm not suggesting that, but at least manipulated to control or affect the inertial field at the airplane in this case. And so what I'm looking for are the thumbprints, or the unique signatures of UFO in the energy domain, in the areas that would set it apart from natural phenomenon. Just as you and I have natural, individual differences, that we have different thumbprints, for instance, or voice prints, or the retinas or the irises of our eyes are all different to make us unique. I suggest that we can learn something about the UFO phenomenon in the same way, by looking at what they have in common and what they have making them unique from each other. Well, the airplane is flying approximately Mach 0.82 approximately, about 470 knots ground speed, or true I should say, true. And the object descends to his altitude from above and does a very high-speed turn and then goes away towards Canada, in the direction of Canada, leaving a wavy smoke trail behind it. I met the captain in San Francisco Airport and took some equipment along, and we recreated that event with the aircraft on the ground, of course. And I had him sit exactly where he sat. I had him take a grease pencil and mark up some plastic that we put over the windows. And in doing all that, we were able to reconstruct the flight path of the object relative to the airplane. Now, why can we do that? Because the autopilot was on at all times, maintaining straight and level flight, so that the motions of the UFO were relative to the cockpit outline, the windows, for instance. Well, what did we find? We found that the UFO, whatever it was, approached at approximately 1,000 miles an hour. It did a very high-speed turn, approximately 20 Gs at least, and then went away from the aircraft at about 1,000 miles an hour in a climb. Well, we don't know of any other aircraft that can do that, and end up looking like an oblate spheroid. I looked up sun angle, and the solar reflections were consistent with a three-dimensional, large reflecting object. The captain told me that at the time that the object was closest to his aircraft, he felt a shock wave, a slight shudder, if you will. It was a very interesting case. He got right on the radio, as he should, and radioed Minneapolis, and do you have any traffic up near us? And they said, no, we do not. He has never seen anything before. He has never seen anything since, and he's turned into a believer. That this man who, before this happened, told me that he just didn't believe these things could exist. Now he does. And I said, Captain, about how big was the object? He said it was like a baseball stadium that would hold 50,000 people.
Picture the brightest, shiniest silver that you've ever seen, and multiply that 100 times and try to get how shiny this object is. I can see where these things could be coming down every day and nobody would ever see them. Because if I hadn't been looking at that one particular spot in the sky, I would never know it had been there. It was that fast. And this is, as I said, the shiniest metal I've ever seen in my life.
He made another interesting statement, which I will recount here. He said that when it first appeared, it impressed him as if it was breaking through the atmosphere, like splitting the blue sky open in order to emerge. And I find that very interesting. It raises some very interesting and fundamental questions. Air resistance, energy, shock wave, and so forth, propulsion. Fundamental questions that science should take a look at. So, in conclusion, that's a great case, a credible witness, two witnesses actually, professional pilots up front. There was no electromagnetic effects. The compasses did not deviate in this case. No radar contact, just the memories of two professionals. What I'd like to do is explore several cases with you that involve pilots. One of the cases that I think you'll find very interesting involved a Japan Airlines cargo flight. The captain was Kenji Teruchi, and he had several other men with him on this flight from Paris to Tokyo, following the polar route. They were carrying a load of Beaujolais wine, and once this event happened and I talked with the captain, I asked him the question, did you land with all the cases unopened? And he laughed and he said, yes, don't worry about that. We delivered our cargo adequately. They took off from Paris, as I said. They flew to Keflavik, Iceland for fuel, and then on to Anchorage. However, coming over the border of Canada into Alaska at cruise altitude on a dark night on autopilot, he described, and his first officer described, seeing a very strange set of lights. The first thing they saw were flickering yellow lights almost in a row, horizontal row, which they thought were afterburners of military jets ahead of them, like they were in trail behind military flight. And that made some sense. However, it went from the 12 o'clock position very quickly off to about the 10 o'clock position, and then maintained the 10 o'clock relative to his bearing, and then moved back again to approximately the 12 o'clock position. Well, jet planes don't do that quickly. They don't move that rapidly. And so he began to be a little concerned that it wasn't what he thought it was. It was about his altitude. The stars were very bright. The air was crystal clear. He said he could see Fairbanks 100 and some miles ahead of him. It was so clear. Well, continuing on, this, by the way, was November 17th, 1986. The Japan Airlines flight was about 100 miles north of Fairbanks, and the air was so clear that he could actually see the city lights that distance away. And he has not started to come down yet. He's still at cruise altitude. He said then they noticed, generally ahead of them, a very large object outlined against the light of the sky. And he described it as being the length of at least 2 aircraft carriers end to end. That's very large. They continue on. I don't remember the airspeed, but it was at cruise airspeed, perhaps Mach 0.8. Something like that, 0.85. As the aircraft is approaching Fairbanks, Captain Terrucci requests permission to execute a 360-degree turn to the right. And so he dials that into the autopilot and starts the high wing bank turn. And the object, very interestingly, maintains a relative fixed position off the left wingtip, which means, very importantly, that object had to accelerate up to that new speed of the turn and then hold that speed around the constant radius. That's very important because that implies thrust management. It implies a great deal of energy control and navigation and guidance. Well, after completing the turn, the 747 then levels out and is heading now for Anchorage to start its descent pretty soon. And the object is still out there on the left-hand side of the airplane. Well, Captain Terrucci then begins his descent to land, and there's an oncoming aircraft that is taken off from Anchorage, which is climbing now. And so he radios that captain, and he basically describes what's been happening, and would you keep an eye out for it. When the 2 aircraft that are passing each other flash their landing lights just to identify each other, the UFO lights just disappear instantaneously. Well, to make a long story short, the aircraft lands safely at Anchorage, refuels, takes off, lands at Tokyo, and the cargo is delivered. I think a very interesting postscript to this event involving this Japan Airlines 747 is what happened to Captain Terrucci after he landed. Well, because of his report, his conscientiousness to fill out a report form and all the paperwork that goes with it, he was evaluated by the medical board of Japan Airlines, and he was asked to terminate his flying duties. Well, that's rather unfortunate. He's a good pilot. He's an excellent pilot. And so I happened to have an opportunity to talk with the medical director of Japan Airlines as he was visiting here in the States. And I asked him about Captain Terrucci. and explained that I had done this analysis on the case, and I was very impressed with him as a pilot. And he informed me at that time that he was no longer flying. But he did invite me to submit materials to the airline explaining what I had learned. Well, I did that, and many months went by, and I learned later on that he had been reinstated. He is now flying again. I was very glad to hear that. Well, one of the facts I brought out in my material was that Captain Terrucci was a good pilot. He was an outstanding pilot. He maintained control of the airplane at all times. He landed on time. He delivered his cargo. He complied with all the requirements. He's playing it by the book, and yet this happened to him. I also pointed out that what he saw in the sky was really not all that unusual, that I have thousands of other cases from around the world going back many years which describe very large objects that perform amazing feats. It's important to realize that a pure visual sighting just is not as important as a correlated radar visual sighting. And this case qualifies. And so we have multiple eyewitnesses in the cockpit who confirm what the radar is telling them, you see. Well, I asked Captain Terrucci about the onboard radar. He has a weather radar on there. And he told me that they tried to image something on the weather radar and didn't receive any signals back from the aircraft now. Nonetheless, there was ground radar. That every aircraft, of course, has to be plotted where it is for safety reasons. And so ground radar had picked up not only the 747, as it should, but also this, quote, uncorrelated target, something near the airplane that shouldn't have been there. Why? Because it wasn't identified. They didn't know what it was. My name's Richard Haines, and I've been a NASA research scientist since the mid-60s. I started my research in the area of visual perception and optics and lighting, and studying some problems for the Gemini program, the two-man capsule program that was orbital. And during the early stages of that research, I had a laboratory which would allow me to simulate the way things look to the astronauts in outer space. And I could totally fool the observer. I could set up a situation that he or she could not accurately describe. The shape and size and distance of targets would just be under my control. I could set up a triangular shaped target, and what you would see is a circle. I could set up a rectangle, a 4-to-1 rectangle, and you'd see a hot dog, because of light scatter within the human eye. Well, I set out to disprove UFO as anything mystical or very, very strange, because I was able to do this in the laboratory. I could allow you to misidentify something. And so I set out to disprove the whole thing as a skeptic. Well, it wasn't very long before I realized that I was wrong. That in fact these phenomena are not misidentified natural phenomena. So some of them are, but not very many. And one thing led to another, and I was led into talking with pilots, and I've been specializing in pilot sightings ever since.
This recording is being prepared by the Cleveland Air Traffic Control Center. The subject concerns a UFO report involving Air Shuttle 5959 and Masala 3179 on February 28, 1996. I hereby certify the following is a true recording of original recorded transmissions pertaining to the subject UFO report.
is Detroit. Is that what you're referring to, or are you talking about the light that's at our 12 o'clock now, about 10 miles?
Any kind of target out near 12 o'clock.
Oh, we got some kind of white light out there at 12 o'clock, and the captain says it's pulsating.
Lead on Metro 261.
Looks like oncoming traffic, but it's just sitting about the same place that it's been the whole, here for about 10 or 15 minutes we've been watching it.
Yeah, the Air Shuttle 59. It looks like it's almost over Saginaw from our position. Okay, Air Shuttle 59, contact.
Whitish, well, they're looking a little red and greenish light, sort of pulsating, and it is constant. It's not a beacon. And Cleveland, Air Shuttle 59.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, hey, just to keep you advised, we're descending to 4,000 feet right now, and as we descended through 10,000 feet, that object is above us right now. It is not on the ground. It's about 10,000 feet.
Okay, sir, we're checking on it right now. I still don't have anything out in front of you at all that I'm showing it. I appreciate you coming back to the frequency and let me know.
I'll keep it right. I'll tell you what, that is weird. It's just sitting there pulsating.
What's up, 30? And actually, when I sent him over to Saginaw, I expected that would be the last I heard from him. He came back up on the frequency and advised me that his clearance was down to 4,000 now, and that he said what he saw was still up above him and was like a red, he said it was a red and green light that was pulsing and like rotating. And he said he'd keep me advised and give us a report once he got into Saginaw. You don't have a camera on board, do you?
We could probably get one from a passenger. You want us to ask?
Yeah, that'd be kind of interesting to have a couple pictures. I think it might make our case a little better.
Okay. 3179, we got a passenger taking a picture of it right now. And, we got a flight attendant who says that they might have saw the same thing the other night.
Masaba 3179, I copy that. Masaba 3179, when you flashed your lights, did
Actually, we made a right turn and he's off about 10 to 11 o'clock.
Okay, so he's off your left side, okay.
Okay, 32.9, we'll see. I wonder if those pictures will show anything. Including the Masaba 3179.
Masaba 3179, go ahead.
Just for your information, I took the picture of Captain on the left side, and also tried to take some of the stars above. So the lowest light on those pictures, that only single light at the bottom of the picture should be what you're looking at. And you might be able to get a position with the star if you want to go that far.
Okay, great. That's a good idea. I appreciate that.
Of course, it has to be the picture of Calma. There was an instamatic camera. Good night, sir.